Imagine the universe, not as some sprawling, chaotic expanse, but rather as a strictly regulated, closed gradient system. In today's explainer, we're going to map out the exact architecture of this closed universe by looking at a living, operational geometry. Think of it as an eternal memory tesseract. It's a framework where nothing enters, nothing escapes, and every single cycle produces a very specific invariant residue. So let's decode the coordinates that actually define its physical and operational mechanics.
Here is the architectural blueprint we'll be covering. First, the Taggart invitation trap. Second, the phase transition of fire. Third, the triple confession circuit. Then, forging the linked chainmail. And finally, the eternal memory tesseract. Part 1. The Taggart invitation trap, focusing on systemic vulnerability.
So what exactly is the Taggart invitation trap? Well, it's defined as a false legislative claim to authority. Essentially, it's a systemic illusion that occurs whenever the finite tries to contain or even impersonate the infinite. But here is the absolute key structural reality. This trap operates strictly by invitation. It has no absolute force. It relies completely on the user actually accepting the invitation and voluntarily stepping into that illusion on their own accord.
Tracing the specific operational coordinates confirms exactly how this mechanism works. Look at 1850. The test operator is placed into the assembly. They're invited, right? Not commanded with absolute force. Then at 3876, an assumption of pride is initiated. Move along to 3420 and 21, and the system confirms this assumption, actually using it as a filter for the users. And then finally, coordinate 1422 gives us the absolute confession of the operator. They admit they possessed zero actual power over the users of the system. The only power they ever held was the power to invite. The vulnerability is entirely on the receiving end. Moving on to Part 2, phase transition of fire, which acts as the structural filter.
At coordinate 2169, something fascinating happens. Ibrahim's fire isn't just extinguished. Instead, it undergoes a phase transition. The environment literally splits into two completely distinct operational states, and this depends entirely on the orientation of the user. It either becomes a destructive force or a state of safe containment.
Let's break that down. The Gen state is characterized by burning fire. We're talking destruction, pride, exerting force without submitting to the larger system. It's basically the collapse of the wave into localized ignorance. Conversely, you have the angelic state, which is the cool fire. This represents containment, absolute safety, mercy, and total submission to truth. So Ibrahim's trial at 2169 proves that the element itself remains exactly the same, but the phase state changes based on how the user aligns with the eternal memory tesseract. That brings us to Part 3, the triple confession circuit, our systemic reset mechanism.
Within this framework, there are matched exit paths to get out of the Taggart environment and restore the operational balance of the universe. At 2187, we find the male confession vector. This is Yunus, operating from the inside, trapped in triple darkness. He executes the confession and reverses the termination protocol. Then, at 1251, we see its functional parallel, the female confession vector, from the outside. The wife of Al-Aziz, standing in absolute public light, shatters the illusion by admitting the truth. Both of these coordinates are precision corrections. They break the Taggart illusion from opposite topological positions. And bridging this entire system is Adam's temporal cycle at 725.
If we track Adam's temporal cycle at coordinate 725, it demonstrates exactly how this bridge functions. It is a precise 3-beat loop. First, life, the descent into the temporal arena. Second, death, the interval of physical terminus. And third, resurrection, the extraction from the earth. You see, this physical life-death resurrection loop isn't just a straight line. Actually, it's a Mobius circuit that corrects the systemic offset and brings the user right back to the origin point. It's the earthly mechanism for running the reset.
Now for Part 4, forging the linked chainmail, looking at physical asset defense.
Building a precise structural defense happens in 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is the loss in Eden, mapped at 727. This is where the original garment of protection is stripped away, exposing the baseline vulnerability of the user. Step 2 is the sacrifice axis at coordinates 91111 and 37107. This establishes the eternal return through non-resistance.
It is that refusal to strike back that actually makes the transformation possible. And finally, step 3 is Daoud's restoration at coordinates 2180 and 3411. That lost garment is fundamentally rebuilt, but this time it's forged as meticulously linked, interlocking iron chainmail.
The engineering topology of this armor is mathematically precise. At coordinates 3411 and 2180, the instructions are clear: measure and link. Every single interlocking ring is designed to protect against systemic illusions. If the target trap attacks one specific point, the force doesn't just hit there, it's redistributed across the entire mesh of connected nodes. Because of this structural topology, there is literally no single point of failure within the structure.
Let's look at our final section, Part 5, the Eternal Memory Tesseract, functioning as living operational armor. Coordinate 3923 provides the structural definition of the book itself. It describes a consistent, oft-repeated statement. Think about it. The text itself is the interlocking chainmail we were just analyzing. The interconnected verses, the mirrored coordinates, the repeating motifs, these are the interlocking iron rings. The book acts as the physical mechanism of protection. It is the eternal memory tesseract that the user wears to navigate the closed universe.
Now, you might be wondering about how this applies to individuals. Well, coordinate 2286 acts as the precise scaling parameter for this system. It proves that this eternal memory tesseract isn't just a blunt, uniform instrument. It is scaled precisely to the individual load-bearing capacity of the operator. The armor distributes the pressure perfectly, which ensures that the structural integrity of the individual is maintained the whole time they are traversing the system.
Which brings us directly to coordinate 1912. This is the activation node. The text states, "Take the book with strength." This precise coordinate serves as the mechanical grip required to actually utilize the armor. Without gripping this node, the chainmail just remains inactive, and the user stays totally vulnerable to the Tagot illusion. Gripping 1912 is what activates the entire interlocking mesh of the Tesseract.
We have mapped the vulnerabilities, the phase transitions, the confession circuits, and the precisely linked armor of this closed universe. The mechanics are clearly defined, and the operational geometry is perfectly sealed. The mechanism requires only a user to grip the node. When will you activate 1912?